The ship was older than most stars. It drifted through the black void of space like a ghost, making no sound, leaving no trail. The beings inside had stopped counting the years long ago. Time meant nothing to those who had lived for 17 million years. The Vethrani called themselves the Collective. They were not one mind, but they were not many either. They existed somewhere in between, connected through technology so old that even they had forgotten who first built it. Their purpose was simple, and it had never changed. They watched. They recorded. They collected every planet they found. They studied. Every creature they discovered, they documented. Every thinking species they encountered became another entry in their great archive. The archive was their religion, their purpose, their reason for existing. It held the records of 10,000 civilizations, some living, some dead, all preserved forever in perfect detail. The Vethrani did not see themselves as cruel. They saw themselves as necessary. The universe was chaos, they believed. Stars died. Planets burned. Species rose and fell like waves on an endless ocean. But the archive would survive. The archive would remember everything, even after the last star went dark. When their sensors detected a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, they felt nothing special. It was the 947th planet they had visited that cycle. The readings showed liquid water, breathable atmosphere, and clear signs of primitive life. The archive ship changed course. It took 3 of their days to reach the system. The Vethrani were patient. They had always been patient. As they approached the third planet from the star, their instruments detected something interesting. Radio waves. Artificial signals. The planet had intelligent life. The senior cataloger, a being named Vrethsilen, examined the data with mild curiosity. The signals were crude, barely organized, full of noise and repetition. The species was clearly young. Very young. Vrethsilen ordered a closer scan. The results painted a picture of a divided world. The intelligent species had spread across most of the planet's surface, but they lived in separate groups that seemed to fight constantly. They had primitive flying machines and explosive weapons. They had only just begun to send objects into orbit around their planet. The classification was obvious. Tier 7, pre-spacefaring, no threat. Minimal interest, but the protocol was the protocol. Every intelligent species must be documented. Every archive entry must include physical samples. Vrethsilen gave the order without emotion. It was the same order given thousands of times before. 3 collection pods descended through the planet's atmosphere under cover of darkness. They targeted isolated areas where the primitive beings lived in small numbers. The pods returned 2 hours later. They carried 47 specimens, alive and unharmed. The beings were strange-looking creatures, standing on 2 legs, covered in various colors of artificial fabric. They screamed and fought when they woke, beating their soft fists against the walls of their containment cells. Vrethsilen watched them for a moment. They were afraid. They always were, the primitive ones. But fear faded with time. The specimens would be sedated, studied, and preserved. Their genetic material would be added to the archive. Their culture, what little of it existed, would be recorded. Then the archive ship would move on, and this small blue planet would become another file among trillions. The medical teams worked quickly. They took blood samples, tissue samples, brain scans. They recorded the sounds the creatures made, cataloged their physical responses to various tests. Everything was done according to procedure. Everything was documented. One of the younger catalogers asked Vrethsilen a question. The young one wanted to know if they should make contact with the planet's civilization. Perhaps these beings would want to know about the greater universe. Perhaps they would benefit from Vethrani knowledge. Vrethsilen dismissed the idea with a gesture. Contact was for species that mattered. Contact was for civilizations that might one day become useful or dangerous. This species, these humans as they called themselves, were neither. They would likely destroy themselves within a few thousand years. Most Tier 7 species did. The archive ship completed its work in 11 days. The specimens were stored in stasis pods, preserved perfectly for all time. The data was compiled, compressed, and transmitted to the Eternal Archive at the center of Athrani space. A new entry was added to the great database. Homo sapiens. Tier 7. Pre-spacefaring. Sample acquired. Reclamation index 0.03. The ship left orbit and engaged its faster-than-light engines. Within seconds, it had crossed the boundary of the solar system. Within minutes, it was light years away. The Vethrani did not look back. They never looked back, but someone had seen them. On the dark side of Earth's moon, a small research station floated in the shadows. It was a secret installation, built by a nation that wanted to watch the stars without others knowing. The scientists inside had been testing a new kind of telescope, one that could see further and clearer than anything built before. They had seen the archive ship arrive. They had watched the collection pods descend. They had recorded everything. The head scientist, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chun, played the footage over and over. Her hands shook as she watched the pods rise back into the sky, carrying her fellow humans into the unknown. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. But she was a scientist, and scientists gathered evidence. She copied the footage to 17 different storage devices. She documented every reading, every sensor log, every piece of data their instruments had captured. She wrote detailed reports describing exactly what she had witnessed. Then she faced a terrible choice. If she revealed this information, the world would panic. Governments would fight over who had the right to respond. Wars might start. Millions might die. But if she stayed silent, those 47 people would simply vanish. Their families would never know what happened to them. And if the aliens returned, humanity would be completely unprepared. Dr. Chun made her decision. She encrypted her files with the strongest protection she could create. She set timers, deadman switches, backup systems that would release the information if she did not check in regularly. Then she began the slow, careful process of getting the evidence to people who would believe her. It would take time. It might take decades. But the truth would come out. High above, the stars continued to shine, cold and indifferent. The Vethrani had already forgotten about the small blue planet. They had new worlds to visit, new species to catalog, new samples to collect. They did not know that somewhere on Earth, a woman was making a promise. They did not know that humanity would remember. They did not understand that some species, when wronged, do not forget. They would learn. 300 years passed on the small blue planet. Dr. Sarah Chun had died long ago, but her evidence survived. For the first 50 years, most people called it a hoax. The governments who knew the truth kept silent, afraid of what might happen if the public learned. They were not alone. The footage was dismissed as fiction. The sensor data was called fake. The 47 missing people were forgotten by everyone, except their families. But secrets have a way of escaping. In the year 2147, a young programmer named Marcus Webb found a strange encrypted file buried deep in an old government database. He was not supposed to be there. He was what people called a hacker, someone who broke into systems for fun and profit. But when he finally cracked the encryption, he forgot about profit entirely. The footage was 300 years old, but it was clear. The ships were real. The abductions were real. Everything was real. Marcus did not sell the information. He did not use it for blackmail. Instead, he did something that changed human history. He released it to everyone, everywhere, all at once. Every screen on Earth showed the same footage. Every speaker played Dr. Chun's recorded message. The world did not panic as the old governments had feared. The world got angry that it was a cold anger, the kind that does not burn out quickly. People did not riot in the streets or attack each other. Instead, they demanded answers. They demanded action. They demanded that their leaders stop fighting each other and start preparing for something bigger. The United Terran Confederacy was born 3 years later. It was not a perfect government. People still disagreed about many things. But they agreed on one thing that mattered. Humanity would never be taken again. Humanity would find the ones who had stolen their people. Humanity would make them answer. The scientists went to work first. They studied the footage, analyzed the sensor data, examined every piece of evidence Dr. Chun had preserved. They learned things about physics that they had never imagined. The alien ships moved in ways that should have been impossible. They generated energy from sources that human science could not explain, but humans were good at learning. They took what they saw and they asked questions. How did the ships move so fast? How did they appear and disappear? What kind of power could make such things possible? It took 50 years to find the first answers. It took another 100 years to turn those answers into technology. The process was slow and painful. Many experiments failed. Many scientists spent their entire lives working on problems they would never solve. But each generation passed their knowledge to the next, and each generation built on what came before. The schools changed. Every child learned about the catalogers, as people now called them. Every child studied science and engineering alongside reading and writing. The message was simple. Humanity needed to grow stronger. Humanity needed to reach the stars. Humanity needed to find its stolen people. Some said it was impossible. The aliens had millions of years of advancement. How could humanity ever catch up? But others pointed out that humans had gone from horse-drawn carts to nuclear power in less than 200 years. Humans learned fast when they had a reason to learn, and humanity had the best reason of all. The first-generation ships, launched in the 23rd century. They were slow, taking decades to reach nearby stars. But they carried brave men and women who volunteered to spend their lives in the void. They built colonies on distant worlds. They spread humanity across multiple systems. And everywhere they went, they watched for signs of the catalogers. Back on Earth, the scientists made their greatest breakthrough in 2487. Her name was Dr. Kenji Sato, and she had spent 40 years studying the mathematics of space-time. In a small laboratory in Tokyo, she finally cracked the equation that would change everything. Faster than light travel. The Alcubierre-Zato drive, they called it. A way to bend space itself. To make distances that took centuries shrink to days. The first ship equipped with the new drive was not large. It carried a crew of 12 and enough supplies for 1 year. But its name carried the weight of 3 centuries of waiting. They called it Remembrance. Captain James Okonkwo stood on the bridge as the drive powered up for the first time. He was the great-great-grandson of one of the 47 who had been taken. His family had kept the memory alive for generations, passing down the story like a sacred text. The crew was silent as the stars outside the window began to stretch and blur. Then, with a flash of light that no human had ever seen before, the Remembrance leaped across the void. They emerged 12 light-years from Earth, near a star called Tau Ceti. The journey had taken 6 hours. Captain Okonkwo sent a message back to Earth. It was short and simple. The drive worked. Humanity could now reach the stars. On Earth, billions of people watched the broadcast. Many cried. Many cheered. But everyone understood what this meant. The hunt could finally begin. The Confederacy built more ships. Hundreds of them, then thousands. They explored nearby systems, mapped routes through space, and searched for any sign of the beings who had visited Earth so long ago. The first clue came from a dead world in a system with no name. Human explorers found ruins there, ancient structures half buried in dust. And in those ruins, they found records. Alien records, written in a language no human could read. It took 20 years to decode the language. But when they finally understood, the message was clear. This world had been visited by the catalogers too. They had come, they had taken samples, and they had left. The civilization here had died out long before, never knowing that their existence had been recorded in some distant archive. The humans took careful notes. They mapped the routes described in the alien records. They learned that the catalogers followed patterns, visiting systems in a predictable order. And they realized something important. The catalogers were still out there, still watching, still taking. The Confederacy built a new kind of ship. It was faster than the Remembrance, armed with weapons developed from alien technology, and crewed by soldiers who had trained their entire lives for war. They called these ships the Tracking Fleet. Their mission was simple: find the catalogers, follow them, learn everything about them. And when the time was right, humanity would stop watching. Humanity would act. The first tracking fleet departed Earth in 2523, exactly 326 years after the Vethrani had taken 47 humans from their homes. The ships carried a message written on their hulls in letters of fire. We remember. We are coming, and we will find you. The stars waited, cold and silent. But they would not be silent for long. The Eternal Archive had existed since before humans learned to make fire. It was the size of a small moon, built in layers over millions of years. Its data cores held the records of 10,000 civilizations. Its specimen vaults contained samples from every intelligent species the Vethrani had ever encountered. It was the greatest collection of knowledge in the galaxy, and it had never been threatened. Until now. Supreme Cataloger Vreth Callan stood in the command center, watching the defensive fleet take position. 7,000 ships formed a sphere around the archive, their weapons charged and ready. Each ship was armed with technology developed over 17 million years of advancement. Each crew had been trained for combat since birth. The Vethrani were ready for war. They had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. The first human ships appeared at the edge of the system at exactly noon local time. Admiral Tanaka had chosen the moment deliberately. She wanted the Vethrani to see them coming. She wanted them to count. 100 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel. Then 200. Then 500. The Vethrani sensors struggled to keep up as more and more vessels appeared. Human battleships, Kreth crystal fighters, Alorian energy spheres, ships from 100 different species, all flying together under the banner of the coalition of the Remembered. When the final count was complete, the number stood at 12,000 vessels. Vreth Callan felt something that the Vethrani had not experienced in millions of years: fear. The enemy outnumbered them almost 2 to 1. And these were not primitive creatures fighting with sticks and stones. These were beings who had learned from Vethrani technology, improved upon it, and turned it against its creators. Admiral Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, studying the enemy formation. The Vethrani had positioned themselves well. Their defensive sphere had no obvious weak points. Their weapons could fire in any direction. Breaking through would cost many lives. She opened a communication channel to the fleet. Her voice was calm, steady, the voice of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. Today we stand at the end of a journey that began 350 years ago. On that day, beings from across the stars came to our home. They took our people. They treated us like specimens to be collected and stored. And they left, believing we would never be able to respond. She paused, letting her words sink in. They were wrong. We have crossed the galaxy to reach this place. We have united species who had never spoken to each other. We have built ships and weapons that our ancestors could not have imagined. And we have done it all for one reason: to show the catalogers that the universe is not their collection. Life is not their property. And humanity does not forget. The channel crackled with responses from across the fleet. Humans cheered. Kreth sang harmonic battle hymns. Alorian pulsed with fierce light. The silent speakers said nothing, but their silence carried more meaning than any words. Admiral Tanaka gave the order to advance. The battle began with light. Vethrani defense platforms opened fire, sending beams of focused energy across the void. Coalition ships scattered, their smaller vessels dodging while larger. Battleships absorbed the impacts with reinforced shields. The first casualties came within minutes. A human cruiser took a direct hit and broke apart. Its crew of 200 lost in an instant. A Kreth crystal fighter shattered under concentrated fire. An Alorian energy sphere flickered and went dark. But for every ship that fell, 3 more pressed forward. The coalition had more than numbers. They had desperation. They had anger. And they had nothing left to lose. The fighting spread across the entire defensive sphere. Human ships punched through one section, while Kreth fighters drew fire from another. Alorian scouts slipped through gaps in the formation, disrupting communications and causing confusion. The silent speakers coordinated everything, their complete knowledge of Vethrani tactics guiding the assault. Vrethkallen watched the battle unfold with growing horror. The enemy was taking heavy losses, yes, but they kept coming. Every time a gap opened in their formation, they filled it with reinforcements. Every time a ship was destroyed, its crew had already transmitted their final sensor data to the fleet. The humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win, regardless of the cost. The battle lasted 9 days. 9 days of constant combat. 9 days of ships exploding and lives ending. 9 days of advances and retreats and desperate last stands. The coalition lost 4,000 vessels. The Vethrani lost 5,000. The space around the Eternal Archive became a graveyard of shattered metal and frozen bodies. On the morning of the 9th day, the Vethrani defensive sphere finally collapsed. Admiral Tanaka ordered the remaining fleet to surround the archive, but hold fire. She had not come all this way to destroy knowledge. She had come for something else entirely. Her message broadcast on all frequencies in the Vethrani's own language. It was a language humans had spent a century learning, just for this moment. For 17 million years, you have traveled the galaxy, taking whatever you wished. You have treated other species as objects to be collected. You have stolen people from their homes and kept them in vaults like trophies. You believed you had the right to do this because you were powerful and others were weak. She stepped closer to the communication console. A reflection visible in the screen. Today, you are no longer the most powerful. Today, you face judgment for your crimes. Not from gods or from fate, but from the very beings you dismissed as insignificant. The Vethrani commanders listened in silence. They had no words. Everything they had believed about the universe was crumbling around them. Surrender your records. Return every specimen you have taken. Open your archive to those you have wronged. Do this, and we will show you mercy. We will not destroy your civilization or hunt your people. We will give you the chance you never gave others. She paused, her eyes hard as stone. Refuse, and we will tear this station apart piece by piece. We will free every specimen by force. We will scatter your archive to the void. And we will spend the next 17 million years making sure the galaxy remembers what happens to those who treat life as property. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, one by one, the remaining Vethrani ships powered down their weapons. The defense platforms went dark. The mighty fleet that had protected the archive for millions of years lowered its guard. Rethkallen appeared on the communication screen. The Supreme Cataloger looked older than the stars, the weight of failure pressing down on ancient shoulders. "What do you want from us?" Admiral Tanaka smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Everything. We want everything you took. And you are going to help us give it back." The doors of the Eternal Archive opened for the first time in 17 million years. Human soldiers stepped through, followed by Kreth, Olorian, and beings from 100 other worlds. The reckoning had come at last. The first warning came from a place called THYRIS-9. It was a small station, floating in empty space far from any star. The Vethrani used it to store overflow data from the main archive. 300 catalogers worked there, sorting and filing the endless stream of information that flowed from survey ships across the galaxy. One day, the data stream stopped. Rethkallen, now the Supreme Cataloger of the Vethrani Collective, ordered an investigation. This was unusual. Vethrani stations did not simply go silent. Their systems had backups upon backups, failsafes built on failsafes. Something must have gone very wrong. The investigation fleet arrived at Thyris 9 4 days later. What they found made no sense. The station was intact. Every system was working perfectly. The lights were on, the air was clean, and the data cores were undamaged. But every Vethrani aboard had vanished. 300 beings, gone without a trace. And in the center of the main control room, sitting on the primary console, was a small stone tablet. The tablet carried an inscription. At first, the investigators did not understand it. The symbols were strange, primitive looking. But when they ran the markings through the translation database, the meaning became clear. The inscription was a genetic sequence. Human genetic sequence. The exact same sequence that had been taken from Earth over 300 years ago. Below the sequence were 3 words in perfect Vethrani script. "We found you." Rethkallen studied the report for a long time. This was impossible. The humans had been Tier 7, barely capable of reaching their own moon. They could not have traveled across the galaxy. They could not have found a hidden Vethrani station. They certainly could not have captured 300 catalogers without leaving any sign of battle. But the evidence was clear. Someone had done exactly that. The Supreme Cataloger ordered increased security at all Vethrani installations. Extra ships were assigned to patrol the outer systems. Sensors were upgraded to detect any approaching vessels. It did not help. Over the next 50 years, 23 more Vethrani outposts were attacked. The pattern was always the same. The stations went silent. Investigation teams found them empty. And always, there was a calling card. A stone tablet. A piece of alien art. A preserved flower from a distant world. Each item came from a species the Vethrani had catalogued and forgotten. The message was clear. The hunters were being hunted. Far across the galaxy. Admiral Yuki Tanaka reviewed the latest mission reports. She was 63 years old, her black hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes were sharp as ever. She had devoted her entire life to one purpose, and that purpose was finally being achieved. The tracking fleet had spent decades studying the Vethrani. They had mapped their patrol routes, decoded their communications, and learned the locations of their outposts. But more importantly, they had found something the Vethrani had never expected. Other victims. The first contact had been accidental. A human survey ship had discovered a planet where the inhabitants were barely surviving. The Kreth, they called themselves. They were silicon-based beings, their bodies made of living crystal. Their civilization had been thriving once, building cities that sang with harmonic resonance. Then the Vethrani had come. They had taken samples of the Kreth, studied their unique biology, and documented their culture. But unlike humans, the Kreth had seen the catalogers clearly. They had tried to fight back. The Vethrani had responded by releasing a virus into the Kreth atmosphere. It was not meant to kill them, merely to weaken them, to teach them that resistance was pointless. The virus had worked too well. Billions of Kreth had died. The survivors had been fighting extinction ever since when human ambassadors told the Kreth about their own experience with the catalogers. The crystal beings had wept. Actual tears, made of liquid silicon, falling from their angular faces. They were not alone. Someone else understood. Someone else remembered. The Kreth joined humanity's cause immediately. More species followed. The Elorian were beings of pure energy, living in the spaces between stars. The Vethrani had found a way to capture and bottle them, keeping samples in special containment fields. The Elorian had thought themselves beyond such things. They had been wrong. The silent speakers of Nimbus 7 were perhaps the strangest allies. They communicated through absolute quiet, using the absence of sound to convey meaning. The Vethrani had catalogued them as interesting but useless, never realizing that the silent speakers had been listening to their communications for centuries. Species after species emerged from the shadows of the galaxy, each carrying their own scars from encounters with the catalogers. The Vethrani had spent 17 million years treating the universe like a collection of specimens. They had never considered that their specimens might one day compare notes. Admiral Tanaka called the alliance the Coalition of the Remembered. Each member species contributed what they could. The Kreth built ships of living crystal, nearly invisible to sensors. The Elorian could pass through solid matter, making them perfect scouts. The silent speakers provided intelligence gathered over millennia of patient listening, and the humans provided something else. They provided anger. Other species were wounded by what the Vethrani had done. They wanted justice or revenge, or simply to be left alone. But humans were different. Humans took the crimes of the past personally, as if every abduction had happened to them individually. They trained harder, fought fiercer, and refused to give up no matter the cost. The coalition grew stronger with each passing year. They captured Vethrani ships and studied their technology. They freed specimens from archive stations and returned them to their home worlds. They sent messages to species who had not yet been contacted, warning them about the catalogers and offering alliance. Callan watched these developments with growing concern. The collective had never faced a threat like this. For 17 million years, they had operated without opposition. Lesser species feared them. Greater species ignored them. No one had ever decided to fight back. The Supreme Cataloger called a meeting of the High Archive. For the first time in Vethrani history, they discussed the possibility of war. The debate lasted for 3 years. Some argued for negotiation. Perhaps the humans could be reasoned with. Perhaps they could be offered something in exchange for peace. Others argued for overwhelming force. The Vethrani had weapons that could crack planets. They should use them, but a third group raised a troubling point. The humans had been studying the Vethrani for over a century. They knew where the outposts were. They knew the patrol routes. They had allies across the galaxy. And most importantly, they knew something that no other species had ever discovered. They knew the location of the Eternal Archive, how the humans had found it. No one could say. The coordinates existed in only 7 minds, protected by mental locks that should have been unbreakable. But somehow, somewhere, the information had leaked. Callan made a decision. The Vethrani would consolidate their forces around the Eternal Archive. They would bring every ship, every weapon, every resource to bear in defense of their most sacred place. Let the humans come. They would find the catalogers waiting for them. Admiral Tanaka received the intelligence report from her silent speaker allies. The Vethrani were gathering. Good. Exactly as planned. she sent a message to every ship in the Coalition fleet. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 3.5 centuries. They are waiting for us. Let us not disappoint them. The hunt was almost over. The reckoning was about to begin. The work of returning what was stolen took 20 years. The Eternal Archive was larger than anyone had imagined. Its specimen vaults stretched for thousands of kilometers, filled with the preserved remains of beings from across the galaxy. Some were recent acquisitions, still alive in stasis pods. Others had been stored for millions of years, their home worlds long since dust and memory. Coalition teams worked day and night, cataloging the cataloger's collection. They identified specimens, traced lineages, and sent messages to distant worlds. Families who had lost members generations ago received calls from humans they had never met, telling them that their loved ones had been found. The living were easier to handle. Stasis pods were opened carefully, and medical teams stood ready to help beings who woke from sleeps lasting centuries. Counselors from a dozen species offered support, explaining what had happened and helping the freed specimens adjust to a universe that had changed completely while they slept. The dead were harder. Many species had no surviving members to reclaim their ancestors. Others had evolved so much that they no longer recognized the specimens as their own. For these, the Coalition built memorials on their home worlds, places where the forgotten could finally rest. Admiral Tanaka oversaw much of this work personally. She was in her 80s now, her body failing but her mind still sharp. Every day, she walked through the archive, watching teams open new vaults and discover new horrors. One morning, she found something that made her stop. The vault was small, hidden in a forgotten corner of the archive. Its contents were not impressive by Vethrani standards. Just 47 stasis pods marked with a simple label. Homo sapiens, Earth. Acquisition date, 2197. Tanaka stood before the pods for a long time. These were the original 47, the humans taken from Earth 350 years ago. The crime that had started everything. The wound that had shaped human history. She ordered the pods opened carefully, one by one. Medical teams waited with equipment designed for beings who had been in stasis for centuries. Counselors prepared speeches in languages that had not been spoken since before the abduction. The first pod opened with a soft hiss. Inside was a young woman, perhaps 25 years old by appearance. She had been frozen in a moment of fear, her face twisted with terror that had never faded. Then she opened her eyes. The terror remained for only a second. Then confusion replaced it as she saw faces looking down at her. Human faces. Faces that looked similar to her own but wore strange clothes and carried stranger technology. "Where am I?" she asked in a dialect of English that had not been spoken in 3 centuries. Admiral Tanaka stepped forward, her old eyes wet with tears she had been holding back for 60 years. "You are safe," she said. "You are home, and you have been gone for a very, very long time." The Vethrani collective did not survive the years that followed. Some catalogers could not accept what had happened. They had spent their entire existence believing in their right to collect and document. When that belief was taken from them, they had nothing left. These chose to end themselves, walking into the cold void of space rather than face a universe that no longer belonged to them. Others fled, taking small ships and vanishing into the deep black between galaxies. They became wanderers, homeless beings searching for meaning in a cosmos that had rejected them. Perhaps they still wander today, looking at stars they once thought they owned. But most of the Vethrani simply stopped. They did not die or flee. They just stopped moving, stopped working, stopped caring. 17 million years of purpose had been stripped away, and they did not know how to find new meaning. They sat in the empty corridors of the archive, watching as others did the work they had once considered sacred. The Coalition faced a choice. They could destroy the archive, scattering its contents across the void. They could leave it empty and abandoned, a monument to failure. Or they could do something else. They chose to keep it, not as a collection of stolen goods, but as a library open to all. The records the Vethrani had gathered were invaluable. They contained knowledge of species long extinct, technologies long forgotten, histories that would otherwise be lost. Destroying this information would be as criminal as stealing it in the first place. The Terran Confederacy established the Galactic Records Initiative. The archive would remain, but its purpose would change. Instead of documenting species against their will, the new archivists invited civilizations to contribute their own records. Every species was welcome to share their history, their culture, their knowledge. Nothing was taken. Everything was given freely. Admiral Tanaka gave her final speech at the dedication ceremony. She stood on a platform in the central chamber of the archive, surrounded by representatives from 300 worlds. Her body was weak, supported by mechanical braces, but her voice carried clearly through the vast space. The beings who built this place believed they were preserving the galaxy. They believed that by taking and storing, they were protecting knowledge from the chaos of time. But they forgot something important. Knowledge without consent is theft. History written by captors is propaganda. A collection of specimens is not a record of life. It is a graveyard. She paused, looking out at the assembled beings. Humans stood beside Kreth. Alorian floated next to silent speakers. Species who had never met before the coalition now worked side by side. We have made mistakes in our history. Humanity has caused pain and suffering, just as we have suffered pain. But we learned something from what was done to us. We learned that being strong does not give anyone the right to take from the weak. We learned that memory is not just about preserving the past. It is about choosing what kind of future we want to build. She smiled, her old face crinkling with warmth. The beings who took our people believed we were insignificant. They gave us a number and filed us away, certain we would never matter. They were wrong. We mattered. We remembered. And we came for them. She turned to face the great central pillar of the archive, where a new inscription had been carved in 1,000 languages. Now we have a new purpose. Not to take, but to receive. Not to collect, but to share. Not to forget, but to remember. And to ensure that no species, anywhere in this galaxy, is ever treated as a specimen again. The crowd erupted in sound and light and silence, each species expressing approval in their own way. The celebration lasted for 3 days. Admiral Yuki Tanaka died 6 months later, peacefully in her sleep. Her ashes were scattered in the space around Earth, joining the stars she had spent her life reaching for. But her work continued. The Galactic Records Initiative grew over the centuries that followed. More species joined, more knowledge was shared, more connections were made. The coalition evolved into something larger, a true community of beings united by common purpose. And at the heart of it all stood the archive. No longer a monument to theft, but a testament to what happened when the galaxy decided to remember together. Somewhere in the void, the last Vethrani wanderers heard the broadcast signals from the new archive. They heard the open invitations, the shared histories, the free exchange of knowledge. They heard laughter and music and the sounds of beings who had chosen cooperation over collection. Perhaps some of them wept. Perhaps some of them understood, finally, what they had been missing for 17 million years. The universe was vast and cold and full of dangers. But it was also full of species who had learned, through pain and loss and determination, that the greatest strength was not the ability to take Dot, it was the willingness to give Dot and humanity. The small species from the small blue planet had taught that lesson to the stars.